Could you just explain again to me why these two buildings, if they housed families in them, would be non-conforming? Is it just a matter of lot coverage and setback issues? Because the use themselves is residential, so if they had families in them, it would be a residential use in a residential zone.
But sometimes a non-conformity typically occurs also for dimensional requirements. The lot size, the building coverage, I think Mr. Connell reviewed some of those, but there are non-conforming components to those parcels, but they're not use. The use is conforming, but the dimensional requirements of the lots are non-conforming.
So when we consider use in the zoning language, is the actual use of the property seen as a greater consideration rather than a setback or a lot coverage issue? I mean, it would seem like the least relief would be to fix the lot coverage and the setback issues rather than change the actual use.
I don't know if there's a way to do that, really, since everything around there is developed. At this point in time, we have a lot of non-conforming parcels in the city, and that's really just the way they are. Unless they're consolidated with other lots, there's really no way to relieve those.
These are two single-family homes, so they've been used as residents, and people have been living in them just fine with whatever type of variances or, use requirements that we implied on top of that. So, okay, thank you very much.
Rosie, I have a question. Are the other homes on that block, are any other homes non-conforming, or are these the only two homes on that block?
I would imagine that they are all pretty similar in lot size, so that there could be others. I did not research that, but I think these homes are typical for the block, so probably there are others that do not meet the lot size requirements.
Mr. Reynolds?
Yeah, a couple of questions, Ms. Eller. What's the process then as far as the zone, as far as the rezoning versus when the particular plans that are kind of staring at us right there come forward? What's that kind of schedule about how that would kind of, or what's the kind of land development process here?
Well, the rezoning would have to be complete. There would be a map change that we would finalize if this is approved, and then Mr. Connell would need to come in for a land development review that would be reviewed by our bureau, also engineering and traffic and other bureaus within the city. That would be reviewed by the Planning Commission, and then they would obviously need to get building permits for the work before that could move forward.
But I think you had said, and correct me if I'm wrong, that there's not, even with the project that, I'm not sure how much you guys have had a chance to review it, but as far as any relief from any parking or anything, that's not, you don't believe any of that is necessary? Or?
It doesn't appear that way now. It's not an engineered drawing, so we would have to look at it more closely as the project moves forward. But it's zone CB, so there are no parking requirements. Mr. Connell is proposing to put some parking behind and underneath, so there is some parking that would be provided. But there really aren't any requirements for that. He's laid it out so that setback requirements are met, height requirements, building coverage, things like that.
So as far, and maybe this is just, the sketch there, but like the sketch there on that part of Garrison Street shows like a two-way, it's like two lanes there, I believe, going eastbound, which I believe right now it's one lane with parking there on that side.
Yeah, in all honesty, it would have to go through review of traffic and other things, other bureaus. We didn't really take a look at that. We took a look at it from a zoning perspective and a parking perspective.
So I guess it's early in the conversation then, as far, and maybe this isn't the germane time to have this conversation about whether or not, because when you're looking at that,
Mr. Reynolds, I think we're looking at the New Street side of the building.
Okay,
is that correct?
Well, I think that's the front of the building that's being shown
Yeah,
there,
so
yes.
this is
on then I apologize.
Street.
I had seen that.
North would be on the left, and to the right, down further, would be Garrison.
I thought since we had the rezoning of the Garrison properties, those would be the ones that would be.
Those are not included in this because
Okay.
of the back side of the
I got you.
building.
Well, that makes sense then as far as that. But there's still parking right there. Anyway. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Heller.
What is the plan for traffic on Garrison Street with this project?
That's part of the land development review. We've not really taken a look at that yet. They would have to do a traffic study, and traffic engineering would take a look at that.
Understood. And how about the first floor component for the project?
Well, we have requirements now in CB. The first floor needs to include retail, restaurant, or personal service, and we have to include those uses on the first floor.
Is that for 100% of the square footage of the first floor?
Of the first floor.
Not just street
Actually,
fronting?
it's for the street frontage. They could have other uses to the rear. It's really up to them, but we have a requirement for the storefront.
Would that be for all 3 streets that are included in this?
It does not apply to local streets, so it would not apply to Garrison Street, to that frontage. It would apply to the new street frontage.
And north?
And north is a local street also.
How do you differentiate a local street versus non-local?
They're broken out in the comprehensive plan. It has to do with number of trips that the street receives and the width of the street.
So there's not a requirement for retail
On
or
local.
office on local, but is it permitted?
It's permitted, sure. Mhm.
Understood. Any other comments or questions from members of council to Ms. Heller? Yes. Ms. Cranky-Smith, go ahead.
One more question. Is there any specific population that's going to be targeted for the apartments?
That's a question for the applicant.
Well, if I may, I mean, it's still,
Please step up to the microphone if you would.
if I may, it's still early in the land development process. Nothing has actually been addressed as of that yet. There's been no plan submitted officially with Ms. Heller or her department. That stuff would all be addressed at the planning commission. We're simply asking for the rezoning of the non-conforming parcels. But if Mr. Connell wishes to address some of that, he can probably provide better information with respect that I could, but it's up. Do you have any knowledge with respect to part of the property for that?
Well, at this point in time,
Mr. Connell, did you with the microphone? Thank you.
we are working with a marketing and financing group out of Westchester, which is performing a demographic study to see what the market area for Bethlehem is. So that it's going to be driven somewhat by what the potential market is, and it will also obviously be driven by the economics to make the project successful. But at this point, there's only one other type of housing that we've considered, and that was veteran housing, because there are quite a number of programs that the federal government has put in place to provide for the needs of veterans when they return from their service. So at this point in time, that's a question that we can't answer definitively, but we can address it when the time comes. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments for the applicant? Mr. Klum?
Thank you. Mr. Connell, just real quick, I know it's preliminary, but the decision has been made, though, for it to be residential from the second floor and up? It's not going to be office space or anything like that?
That's the direction that we're going in. Under CB, there's a multitude of possibilities for how the project could be developed. One of the things that I looked at in developing the concept was the comprehensive plan that the city put in place to see if there were any desired types of uses in the center city area that jumped out as a result of that comprehensive plan study. Specifically, in the center city area, the plan recommends high-density residential. In fact, it goes on to say that high-rise apartments should be located near the downtown area. And the rationale behind that is given is that it provides a sound economic base in regard to taxing, and it also provides an increase in the number of customers that are in walking distance in respect to the existing businesses and merchants in the downtown area. So it's seen that residential uses would support continued growth in the downtown area. And that's why we focused on residential with our concept.
Understood. Thank you, Mr. Connell.
I have a couple questions for you, please. You know, I am concerned about the loss of residential zoning on that street. I think it's a tight street right now, and it has a lot of vibrancy to it. It certainly has its challenges, but it's an intact street. There's not a lot of holes or teeth on Garrison itself. The holes are all on New Street. So I applaud what you're doing on New Street. I want you to build a good, dense residential building downtown. I am, however, deeply concerned about the loss of the integrity of this block. Even if it's on the end, it's still chipping away into the neighborhood. So while I know that this zoning change would make it nice and symmetrical for your lot, I do worry that more about what's going to happen to the block itself with that type of incursion into the neighborhood, and no certain guarantee that it will be residential. So my question would be, if you were not able to change the zoning, could you still build this building? I think I know what the answer is going to be, but I'm going to ask it anyways. Could you still build this building and make it viable and request whatever variances you might need for setback or screening from the residential area?
This is the very first step in this process, and there's so many steps that have to be taken on this journey and variables that are going to come into play that I don't think I can really honestly answer your question at this time.
But it was still a bit of a gamble to buy a lot that is in a residential neighborhood for a project of this nature, I think. So there had to be some kind of thought that, what am I going to do if this doesn't work? The second thing I would ask is, how high can this building go?
150 feet?
I think it's 120, it's pretty high in CD. Yeah.
So it could go higher ostensibly.
Yes.
Is that a consideration of yours?
Not at this time, no.
No.
What drove the massing and the proportion of the building is, in this concept, I was able to provide 74 parking spaces in an enclosed garage. The number of apartments is 72, and that was driven partly by the number of parking that could be provided in the concept, and also by the type of construction. Limiting the building to this height allows it to be constructed as a podium type of construction. It doesn't have to get into fire-resistant construction. If it did that, the cost of the construction would escalate dramatically. So the limitations are what can be done to provide a reasonable amount of parking, even though the property is less than 400 feet from the North Street parking garage and the Broad Street surface parking lot. And those two have approximately 900 spaces. The convenience of having parking for the tenants is a huge marketing benefit. So parking drives this, the type of construction drives this. That's how the concept developed.
And does these lots on New Street cover where the sinkhole was?
Yes.
Yes. And is that a concern in terms of the stability of your building? I mean, that it would recur?
Well, now that the city replaced the water line, I don't think there's any fear of a sinkhole developing on the property again.
That's all the questions I have. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Are there any other comments or questions from members of council? Thank you. Seeing none, we'll